Welcome back, or welcome to the Rebel Tech Podcast, where we discuss the promises and perils of all things emerging technology and innovation. Now, I always say all things emerging tech and innovation, but today we truly mean it. And we're going to have a discussion about what is arguably one of the most important issues for the future of humanity, civilization, and of course, Texas. We're talking about space. And while this is not an area that my organization has directly ventured into just yet, I suppose this will be the start of that and all that's to come. And today I'm joined by, I think, indisputably the best guest we could have to talk about space exploration and all things that Texas is doing to advance that mission as it relates to the governance structure, the business, and all the ingredients that go into what will be Texas's definitional success in this space race. I'm joined by Norman Garza, and Norman Garza serves as the executive director of the Texas Space Commission, which we're going to get into what your responsibility is, just what that means. But to contextualize his role and why it's so important in this discussion, he has been tasked by Governor Abbott, by the authors of legislation who created this commission, with assembling the dream team. The team, we can think about the astronauts who brought us to the moon. We're thinking about the team that's going to take that one step further with research, innovation, development, and so on. And so, Norman, we are so grateful to have you on the podcast today, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us.
Thank you, David. I'll dispute one comment about me being arguably the best person. I've got a 9-person board who were appointed by the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the House Speaker, and they are just incredible. I always try to find the opportunity to include them with these sorts of engagements. Mm-hmm. They're scattered across the state. None of them live here in Austin, but that's where you can find somebody like a former astronaut, somebody like a former Secretary of the Air Force, someone that's been part of the Boeing Lockheed, someone that's been part of the communications team on behalf of the Johnson Space Center ecosystem for a number of years. These folks are really incredible, and I'm so grateful to work with them. Thank you for your comments.
Oh, of course. And after this, I'd love to see just how many gigabytes of data their resumes take up, because I can imagine.
Touche.
Well, I know we were chatting about this beforehand. I'm actually going to start opening with a quotation, if that's okay, just to kind of contextualize why Texas is so crucial to space, and then any comments you want to provide on this, and we'll kind of just jump right in. Yeah. So this is coming from none other than our fearless leader, Governor Greg Abbott. Since its very inception, NASA's Johnson Space Center has been home to manned spaceflight, propelling Texas as the national leader in the U.S. space program. He goes on to say, "It was at Rice University where President John F. Kennedy announced that the U.S. would put a man on the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. Now, with the Texas Space Commission, our great state will have a group that is responsible for dreaming and achieving the next generation of human exploration in space. Texas is the launchpad for Mars, innovating the technology that will colonize humanity's first new planet. As we look into the future of space, one thing is clear. Those who reach for the stars do so from the great state of Texas. I look forward to working with the Texas Space Commission, and I thank the Texas legislature for partnering with industry and higher ed institutions to secure the future of Texas's robust space industry." Now, I normally don't read quotations to kick this off, but I thought that was perfect. And I don't know if you have comments. I mean, you've been working on this commission that he's defining. What are your thoughts when you hear this?
Couldn't be more correct, first off. And as you mentioned, those comments were made at Johnson Space Center when he announced the appointments to this board of directors for the Texas Space Commission. And I like to always recall another quote that he used. I won't get it as verbatim with it printed in front of me here like you, but at his last inauguration, he actually asked a question. And I love to start my engagement with audiences around the state with the same question. Remind us, what was the first word spoken from the moon that everybody else on Earth heard a couple of decades ago?
It'd be Houston.
Houston. And so he likes to follow up often by describing whatever's next as the first next, be it the moon, be it Mars, somewhere else out in orbit. The first word that the rest of us hear back on Earth should be something related to Texas, whether it's Houston or otherwise, because of the legacy that Johnson Space Center has. And because of that legacy, your last statement there from him with regard to industry presence in Texas is really the momentum behind the creation of the Texas Space Commission. If I may, kind of a segue, sort of the original intent here was to solve for the question of who is the one person that could write a one-pager about everything underway currently throughout the entire Lone Star State in terms of commercial space exploration. And that, of course, is a little bit of a joke because it's not one person and it certainly can't fit on a one page.
Yeah.
So instead, through conversations, there became the opportunity to coalesce or identify and bring together a group of people that can help inform that answer. And that is how a commission was decided upon, and the creation of a board by bringing together these experts that can really look back on their existing careers and then also look forward with what the opportunities are in Texas based off of the existing presence of private industry, whether that's the big brands that many of us know about, such as SpaceX, all the way down at the tip of Texas in the Rio Grande Valley on Boca Chica Beach outside of Brownsville. Also all the way out in the Big Bend of Texas with Blue Origin having a presence in Culberson County outside of Van Horn, and everything in between. But that's the kind of genesis, if you will, that I like to help set the stage when I talk to folks across the state. So thanks for the comment about the governor's quote.
Oh, of course. No, and great counterpoint. I'm actually going to steal that one from you if I can. And you mentioned the commission. You briefly got into the collaboration model that's happening, who's involved. I think a lot of listeners of this podcast are probably aware that there was a bill last session, House Bill 3447, which resulted in the creation of not just the Space Commission, but the Texas Aerospace Research and Space Economy Consortium. We'll call it TARSEC.
Yes, sir.
What do they do? If you have, a couple minutes, somebody's
Absolutely.
Interested, what are they responsible for doing in the state of Texas?
Great question. So TARSEC is an advisory group, also, like you said, established in House Bill 3447, and they're appointed individuals, but it's a non-governing entity. Whereas the Texas Space Commission Board of Directors is a governing entity. So let's start with TARSEC. It's 9 folks. In this case, it's 2 appointed by the governor, 2 appointed by the lieutenant governor, 2 appointed by the House Speaker, the UT System Chancellor or their designee, the A&M System Chancellor or their designee, and the Vice President or their designee. Back to the history of the words that came from President Kennedy at Rice. Its legacy there in the greater Houston area with proximity to Johnson Space Center was important to the bill authors to ensure that not only our flagship public institutions of higher education, but also the one that's got such a legacy there in the Harris County area is represented on this group of advisors to the Texas Space Commission Board of Directors. So TARSEC, those 9 folks, they come from a variety of backgrounds, including a former astronaut, including economic development, including private industry, CEO, startups, that all have something to do currently operationally with space exploration. So it's pretty cool. There's one here in the Austin area, several down in the Houston area, as you might imagine, but these are folks who have grand ideas and they have their ear to the ground when it comes to the big ideas. And therefore, House Bill 3447 creates that entity to be the synergy for the Texas Space Commission Board of Directors, which operates as any governing entity does in the state by following the Open Meetings Act and ensuring that all of the things are done properly, accordingly, above board, et cetera. And so in addition to these 2 sets of 9, the 9 of TARSEC and the 9 on the board, between the 2 rather, we have some deliverables that need to be met before the end of this calendar year, of which includes a strategic plan that will be provided to the governor and the legislature in advance of the 2025 legislative session. And so the TARSEC group helps to keep their ear on the ground and provide information to the board on different companies that are coming to the state, different research that is underway, different projects that are currently happening in different parts of the state, because they're sort of that they're the eyes and ears, if you will, for this new thing called the Texas Space Commission. They're the folks that can all go to the same location at the same time and not be in violation of open meetings, because they're not deciders here. They're not the folks that have oversight of the grant program. There's $150 million that the legislature also provided to the Texas Space Commission, and that is overseen by the board of directors. So it's not TARSEC. There's a very clear separation here of duties and responsibilities. But it is certainly a conduit for information to be shared, both in terms of receiving the information from the public and or the industry sectors across the state, as well as pushing out information from the board as well. So the more people, and thankfully you all are one of those platforms that are helping spread the word, if you will, here, the better, because then that helps us solve for two opportunities. Yeah. The first is making sure that any of those companies that are located here in Texas today stay, and certainly help them expand their existing footprint. The second thing that we have the chance to solve for is bringing any company that's not yet here in Texas to be located somewhere in the Lone Star State, from wherever else in the country or the world that they might be today. Those are the two big things. So as like some of my friends and family think I've got all of these launch codes and keys and, you know, a front row seat in a space shuttle. That is not what the Texas Space Commission is doing. We're really trying to ensure that that economic development opportunity progresses as quickly as possible, and that Texas is positioned accordingly.
See, and here I thought, and I was hoping, you know, you've been across the state, you've been hard to track down and get you on this podcast, you're working on economic development. I thought you were with Elon Musk, you know, headed to the ISS this whole time. Well, okay, there's a lot of great stuff there. I want to unpack some of it. I think one of the things that's worth mentioning and highlighting, you know, we were chatting beforehand, I'm originally from California. So to any longtime listeners that are just now learning that, please don't unsubscribe from this show. But, you know, we're seeing in California, the California Coastal Commission recently, they decided to not move forward with Elon Musk's plan to increase the amount of launches from the state on grounds of what appears to be political discrimination. And I bring that up because you're seeing different states take different approaches. California, they're losing a lot of their industry, not just in space. And we're talking semiconductors, we're talking high tech, everything. And it's sad to see that's the way they're headed. With space, you know, we started this conversation. Texas has been at the epicenter. Texas and Florida, two really the leading states here. I guess just to ask you point blank, why is it so important that Texas maintain its dominance here? If we're seeing other states maybe not move as fast, this commission is created not because Texas has been crippled and failing in space. We've been leading, but to propel it even further forward. Why is that so important for our listeners to understand, you know, what this means for the next 10, 20, 50 years?
Sure. So not being specific about other states in the country, decisions being made, policies and regulations being enforced that might be a decision point for private businesses as they determine what their operations look like is certainly a reality. And thankfully, many of those brands are familiar with exactly how business-friendly Texas wants to position itself, regardless of the sector, but certainly when it comes to space. And they've been literally, if you will, kind of voting with their feet. They've been deciding to set up shop somewhere in Texas. And therefore, it's important for the leaders of our state, and thankfully with the support of the legislature, to ensure that opportunities are present because of the decisions that businesses are making. Often I go to different places and you've got the one person in the room who inevitably asks, but why 150 million to space instead of to healthcare or instead of to roads or instead of to education, et cetera? And it's a relative answer, but the truth is because businesses have decided to plant their flag somewhere in Texas, it would make no sense if the state leaders and the legislature weren't listening, right? And so as part of that listening exercise, what has been decided thus far at the governmental level here in Texas is let's pay attention. Let's put a board together. Let's help them be the eyes and ears for the state. And let's also provide some funds that attract the businesses who are already operating here and those who are yet to decide to be present here. So I hope I answered the question, at least to some degree, but it's important that Texas continues to position itself because the alternative is those companies don't come here. They go to places like Florida or Washington State, or even, yes, to some degree, different parts of California per se, Alabama, the East Coast, or even other countries. And so how can Texas just sit back? That's not clearly been what the legislature and the governor and the leaders decided because of that industry presence, specifically when it comes to commercial space exploration.
Yeah. No, I mean, well said. And, from the foundation's perspective too, it's one thing when we're talking about, let's say it's the entertainment industry, Hollywood, California, or
Sure.
different tax credits
Yep.
going to Alabama and other
That's right.
states. We tend to be pretty clear that there is a role of government when it comes to scarce taxpayer dollars, and, entertainment frivolity is probably not the best use. When we're talking about space, we aren't just talking about the future of civilization, which we are, which is the most significant component to everything that we're talking about here. But it also has implications, as you guys are working on, educationally, with where our talent and workforce is going to go, with research facilities, militaristically. And that's something, if we can get into that at some point too, I'd love to touch on that. We're, as Texas goes, so goes the nation. And if that's the case on space, then as Texas goes on space, so we go intergalactically, is where we're headed. And I can hear Josh Trevino in our office. His head is exploding with glee right now.
You should trademark that.
I should trade that. But do any comments on the military applications too? Because this isn't just national security from a cyber perspective. This is everything. Anything you want to add on that?
Absolutely. Reminder that the legislation actually specifies academic, commercial, military, and governmental sectors as the drivers behind the creation of this new agency called the Texas Space Commission. And so both Dr. Greg Bonin, state representative, bill author, House Bill 3447, and Governor Greg Abbott, two Gregs, often make sure that the conversation with regard to the Space Commission doesn't exclude the narrative about military, national defense, national security, DoD. Obviously, Texas has a long-standing support structure in place through the multiple installations around our state to support our troops. Whether it's the example of Army Futures Command deciding to plant their flag as the headquarters in Texas right here in Austin, or new opportunities with these things called the U.S. Space Force, as well as the Space Command and all of their varieties thereunder of activities, variety of activities. And so the opportunity is here, back to your point of sort of things beyond just launching off of the planet, things like a pipeline of human capital, all the way down to STEM education that invigorates young children in the sciences, and any technician type of a role, or business analytics, that all need to be in place to support the next generation of space exploration. Also, perhaps it's a student that does, this really cool high school project that segues into them getting a degree or a certificate post high school, and then they get a job or they join the military. And if they join the military in any of those branches, they're all doing something with regard to space, whether it's weapons, whether it's communications, whether it's biomedicine, you name it. There's this big interest in trying to figure out how Texas also positions itself to be the location for opportunities yet known that will come from the Pentagon. We want to make sure that Texas and the Texas Space Commission, or NASA, like your T-shirt here today, all know that not only is the usual phrase, Texas is open for business when it comes to the private sector, but Texas is also ready to answer the call when it comes to military service opportunities as well.
Yeah, no, that's totally makes sense. And in preparation for this episode, doing some research, looking at different news reporting, there was a series of interviews where there were recent graduates from UT, Texas A&M, great institutions. I say great institutions. I know we have a great Aggie in front of us to the UT Longhorn here. And some of these students were celebrating the fact that now they can find a job in the state of Texas working in space. And how great, again, this comes back to Rice, and this comes back to the institutions that really catapulted a lot of the space race here in Texas. But I have some buddies from undergrad that ended up working at Blue Origin, going out to Washington, and nothing wrong with that. They enjoyed it. But I remember having a discussion with one of my friends who said, how great would it be if I could contribute to my home state of Texas using my new talent?
Bingo.
And this is exactly what we're working toward. Well, you already cut a little bit of an advertisement for some of the strategic plans you guys are working on. You mentioned some of the deliverables, things that are coming down the pipe in advance of next session. Any more you want to add on those strategic plans and what that means for the future of the military, civil, commercial space
Yes, sir.
industry.
Yep.
Anything you want to add there?
So, believe by the end of next week on our website, which is pretty cool to say, it's space.texas.gov, space.texas.gov. The public can go and contribute thoughts to our strategic plan by responding to a series of questions. So it's an input opportunity from the public to ensure that the board at least considers different kinds of thrust areas, topics of interest, priorities, etc. Be that from a school teacher to a venture capitalist to a startup owner to a major researcher, if you will. So I invite folks to participate by going to our website and answering those series of questions that should be online live by the end of next week.
Great.
The next thing is our strategic plan is delivered by the end of this calendar year. The board of directors will likely meet next in open meeting on December 10th. I think that's the second week of December. It allows for the remainder of this month and the entire month of November for folks to go to our website and get the application for the SURF grant program, fill it out, and send it in. By law, the Space Commission also hired, in addition to an executive director, a chief compliance officer. That person has to complete the internal vetting process and review of applications to ensure that they're complete and proper before the board can review them. So if the board has the intention of meeting that second week of December, sort of a soft reverse engineered deadline that folks should target to send in their applications is likely, I'll say, Friday, November 15th.
Yeah.
That allows us still at the staff level, of which, by the way, there are 6 of us now, the chance to go through our internal vetting process and follow our documenting procedures that, our responsibilities in terms of audits, et cetera, on when we receive an application, is it complete, or all of the components submitted, et cetera. Plus, we have Thanksgiving around that same time as well. So, give us at least a couple of days to not do work, but still have the board prepared for a meeting on December 10th. So, folks should use November 15th as a soft deadline if they would like to be considered before the end of this calendar year. But I'd also want to make the distinction that the board won't use all of the fund available in this first round of a review at their next meeting. Additionally, I can report that as of this morning, there were over 30 applications that we have received since September 13th.
Okay.
And those 30-something applications already amount to more than $150 million. That wasn't unexpected, to be candid. But what these applications are allowing us to do is play capture manager of the big ideas. It's a demand signal that we're trying to catalog, and then we'll use some of those big ideas to inform elements of the strategic plan. The strategic plan, more specifically, if I may, can also be referenced similar as what was done post-Hurricane Harvey. When Governor Abbott commissioned a group, it was called the Governor's Commission to Rebuild Texas, and there was a set of recommendations, approximately 40, that turned into, I believe, about 30 pieces of legislation, which, without having the exact number in front of me, was quantified as hundreds of millions of dollars in the Appropriations Act to multiple state agencies, all meant to help reestablish the economy and the communities that were impacted post-Hurricane Harvey. So if what the strategic plan that the Texas Space Commission delivers to the legislature and the governor can do at the very least is inform a series of strategies that might turn into pieces of legislation that could inform appropriations across state government, not just solely for the Space Commission. Maybe it's funds that the Workforce Commission can best put into practice. Maybe it's the Higher Education Coordinating Board. Maybe it's universities. Maybe it's TxDOT. Maybe it's DPS. All of these different state agencies that if there was a big idea which the Space Commission learns about and it's described in the strategic plan, it's well received by the legislature, it's supported by the leadership, and then ultimately there's this multi kind of everybody linking arms together, trying to do the same thing in a correct direction for the respective effort of positioning Texas to be the best when it comes to the commercial space exploration economy, then that is the best thing that could come from the first 9 months of this thing called the Texas Space Commission before the end of the year.
That, I mean, and again, with how nascent this is, because when did it officially, was it officially established? March or April this year?
That's right. The announcement at Johnson Space Center by the governor of this board was in late March.
Late March, yeah. And that's, in thinking about this from the broader tech perspective, we've had different guests, Representative Giovanni Capriglione and Senator Tam Parker, great champions of tech policy. When we talk about what makes Texas successful from an advocacy perspective for tech policy, it's exactly what you're enumerating here, which is the stakeholder process leading up to the legislative session. Now, you're talking about far more than just industry coming together and having discussions. You're doing actual seismic change across the state of Texas, but even having the chance for the public to provide input and comments. Seriously, to anyone watching, please go on the website and submit ideas. I know if you're watching this podcast, you care enough about these issues to want to do so.
That's right.
But to have this process where you can find the emerging themes, where you can figure out, it's not that you guys are doing this to respond to each individual Texan per se, but we have some good ideas in this state. The industriousness that made Texas the epicenter of space in the 1960s is what we need to continue here. There's a group, I saw it around X today. I'm going to butcher it, so maybe we'll have to put it in the description. It's like 2100X. And it seems like it's a new campaign. They're starting to get the public excited about space again. And I know this is something Elon has talked about. And one of the most formative interviews I saw of him was on 60 Minutes when he was talking about how he was starting SpaceX. And initially, some of the astronauts at NASA were throwing stones his way and saying the private sector can't do it. And he didn't take no for an answer. And look where he's at now. We're recording this a week and a half or so after the historic launch here in Texas in Boca Chica, where they were able to bring their heaviest rocket back to Earth and capture it for reusability. And this is all happening in Texas. And so I'm wondering, for you, and I know you have to be on script and probably can't reveal things that are in the works right now, but when you think about the real forward thinking, not just the strategic plan that's going to be submitted this year, but we're talking 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the future. What role does Texas play in space? And what do you think the next couple of decades holds here in Texas?
Fair question. It's really cool to be in the room and listen to some bright people expand exactly on your point currently. Here's how I can answer. I've learned that there are opportunities to either conduct research or actually manufacture materials in zero gravity more efficiently than here on Earth.
Wow.
And so some examples that I have heard include things like biotissue, things like our eyes, things that current surgeons do or use that might be just exponentially better because of something that can occur in orbit or on something like the lunar surface that has applicability back to the rest of us here on Earth. And so that's one example. Another example that I've learned is whether it's a crystal or other chemical element, the growth patterns occur differently back in zero gravity than here on Earth. And things like conduit for communications, they just have a much better use. Or the creation of semiconductor wafers differently than how that's manufactured here on Earth that could really be moving or driving the ball, moving the needle here when it comes to the people with those big ideas. So those are just examples of topics, but not specific projects or initiatives to respond to your question for why Texas should continue to be part of this conversation. Back to chips, everybody who's paid a little bit of attention knows that the legislature, through Governor Abbott's leadership, also threw the marker on the table when it comes to the semiconductor industry here in Texas because of the legacy that the state has enjoyed from places like Texas Instruments decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's other opportunities, including the biomedical field, that I think space is going to just create unknown opportunities that really will be a benefit to the rest of us here.
Yeah, that's more to come too. And so for folks, when the report is public,
Sure.
we'll see some more legislative ideas that come from that too, and what we can do
Hopefully.
to keep advancing it. Okay, so we've covered a lot of kind of the lay of the land of what your day-to-day, so to speak, encompasses. This is kind of out of left field. I know Icon is a company that is in partnership with the commission, and if I'm not mistaken, they're actually involved in the commission directly.
So words matter.
Yes, they do.
One of the appointees to the Texas Space Commission Board of Directors, his name is Evan Loomis.
That's right. Yeah.
And he has a very close affiliation with Icon.
That's right.
Yeah.
So my question then stemming off this is, I guess, twofold. One, a chance to talk about any of the unique subject matter expertise that you've assembled with this board and with the commission. So anything you want to add there to kind of build on the biomedical and all the different points of view. Actually, yeah, let's start there, and then I'll ask a follow-up about 3D printing homes on Mars.
Sure. First, I want to make sure that everybody understands that the Space Commission staff, under the leadership of our Chief Compliance Officer, Miss Erin Chancellor, an attorney, has set up some very robust policies and issued rules through the Secretary of State's office to ensure that conflicts of interest are accounted for, and that this board is not jeopardized in their respective private roles as well as their public role here as an appointee to the Space Commission Board of Directors. That being said, they're incredible, but the ongoing joke has been not just making sure that they don't violate the Open Meetings Act by too many of them being at the same place unrelated to Space Commission business, just because of their day jobs and the places they go and the people they meet with and the things that they're asked to participate in. What happens when we have several of them whom are involved with a particular grant applicant and then have to recuse themselves accordingly? And Erin's established, with the help of Joseph over in the governor's office from the general counsel's team, and our deputy executive director, Blake Calvert, as well, making sure that these processes are in place. But to your point of Evan and his portfolio of investments that his private life has made and the companies that he's been part of, that's why he was vetted, and the decision was made between the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker, respectively, on the kinds of people with the expertise and experiences and backgrounds to serve on this board. So they're helping kind of craft the big idea conversation, but we're also trying to make sure that they do so in the proper manner. But other people on our board, for example, you referenced that incredible operation down at Starbase a week ago. We're going to be talking about that if you and I are still around in our 70s, 80s, and 90s. Because of that activity, there is just this unknown opportunity of those other things that I was describing that I'm not even an engineer or a scientist, but I do my best to repeat correctly. We're going to be talking about that for a long time. But the lady who runs Starbase for SpaceX is the vice chair of the Texas Space Commission Board of Directors, Kathy Leaders. And she has this incredible career at NASA, especially at headquarters in DC and down at the Cape in Florida. We've got folks that were involved with the Starliner mission as well, represented as a member of the board. Also Lockheed, also a startup called Venus Aerospace that's located at Ellington Field down outside of Houston near Johnson Space Center. They're an engine company, and you can't leave this planet in a rocket without the best kind of engine possible. But there's technologies that might be useful when it comes to space exploration that also has applicability in the commercial sector. And so imagine things like the Concorde airplane that got people around the globe quickly. What if there was even better rocket engine on an airplane that folks could get around the world even faster. This is another example of somebody who is on our board with the expertise and the experiences that are just crazy. But I love bragging about Dr. Heather Wilson, who's the president of the University of Texas at El Paso, former Secretary of the Air Force, former member of Congress from New Mexico, graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. She has been part of teams throughout her career, both in terms of making sure that things are done operationally correct from a managerial perspective, but also decisions are made strategically, thoughtfully for a big impact long term when it comes to how to spend public dollars. And so it's her voice in particular that continues to help inform decisions being made internally on what's next with regard to both the strategic plan as well as the grant program. We also have a former astronaut, another female, Dr. Nancy Curry Gregg, professor at Texas A&M, and her experiences in orbit and then seeing her in the classroom with students is just incredible. And so her perspective that she brings to the table is very important as well. But back to Evan. Evan is certainly the big idea guy. As far as I can tell, if I worked like on his team directly every day, you might kind of want to pull your hair out every day just because they're so crazy and cool and impactful ideas that he likes to entertain and then help drive the ball, of course, once a decision is made as well. But there's a whole conversation about how homes can be built through 3D printing right here in Austin, Texas, as well as on the moon or on Mars. I mean, it's that wide of a scope of things that he's involved with as well.
Well, and that's, I'm actually taking notes for my own edification. This is not for the podcast. I'm learning so much about the composition. And I'm thinking back to, in grad school, I had this really unique opportunity to take a corporate governance class with the former chancellor of the UT system, Dr. Bill Cunningham. And his claim to fame is that he teaches one lecture and then he brings guest lecturers in for the subsequent 15 classes. And the coolest lectures we had was the whistleblower at Enron and a former astronaut. And the thing that stuck out the most, and as you're explaining the composition, astronauts have a unique, a necessity that they can solve problems instantaneously while also foreseeing future risks. And so I would love to be a fly on the wall in these. We can because some of these are public discussions. But in the problem solving of what you guys are looking at, and in mentioning Evan and Icon, me and some colleagues had a chance last year to go to the Icon facility right here. And they come to South by Southwest every year too. And I know they've got some contracts with NASA and different federal departments because we're looking at ways to build more sustainably as well and to find ways to ensure the Texas heat we can mitigate. So resilience for what's to come when we're on other planets. So we could keep going down this rabbit hole, and by all means, if you want to pull it elsewhere, go for it. But with all this, you're not an astronaut. Your full-time job before joining this was really building out a lot of the semiconductor research capacity for Texas. What have you learned about space that you didn't know before that you think the public would find interesting, or what's really caught you off guard with space?
Great question. I would say that it is like an onion, and every layer that's just peeled back, I'm constantly amazed at who else is involved and what other application there is, either in space or here on Earth, that I'm in a room hearing a briefing or going to a site visit like Icon or something. But you're right, I'm not an engineer, and there's another non-engineer who is part of this mix of people that I'd be remiss not to comment on, and that's the chair of the Texas Space Commission. Her name is Gwen Griffin. Her last name is actually sort of an icon to many folks who have paid attention to the space conversation in Texas for a number of years, but especially at Johnson Space Center. Her father is a former flight director at Johnson, and he wore many hats during his NASA career. Incredible guy. But Gwen is a communicator by trade. She's not a former astronaut. She's not an engineer. She has been in and around this conversation her entire life, and some of her past career stops have included things like national defense issues. But my point is, me not being an engineer, to your comment, but being part of the conversation, I'm learning how to best describe what this means for Texas because of the leadership that Gwen provides to me as the chair of our commission, and her board members as well. Always making sure that we're not making something not too technical, obviously, but also making sure that it resonates from everyone, between her dad, who has a long-term career with NASA, or my own 80-something-year-old grandmother, who spent most of her life down in the Rio Grande Valley, and now appreciating something like SpaceX operating not too far from where she raised my dad and her kids, my aunts and uncles. That part is the cool thing for me, to be part of this whole thing called the Texas Space Commission.
Yeah. And how neat too that the education that comes from having a robust space enterprise in Texas is exactly what we said about halfway through. The remembrance of what happened at Starbase just a week ago. The interviews that I saw, some of the kids who are, in different science programs, and their teachers are encouraging them to watch this live and explaining just what this means for the future of space. And there was this one interview with a kid who kind of jokes. He's like, I want nothing more than to be an engineer working on rockets. And after seeing this, I'm like, wow, the bar just got lifted a lot higher. These kids understand what this means for the future. And to see that excitement and the glimmer of their eyes, and knowing you get to be a part of that too, as somebody who probably has that glimmer every day walking into your office, that's what this podcast is all about. That's what good advocacy really is finding a way to bridge that gap between audiences like ourselves that aren't engineers to be able to understand, why is the thrust capacity of a Falcon 9 important for civilization? Well, we need to be able to lift stuff to Mars so we can get there. So I just have one or two more questions for you. Well, I could probably go for hours, but how do you predict? I know I asked you this already to a certain extent about what's coming in the next couple of decades, but what are you most looking forward to in terms of the evolution of space in the next couple of decades, just the ecosystem? So if we're talking about talent, we're talking about building capacity, is there something you want to highlight based on your interest or the work of your organization?
So another thing that we've learned is that NASA has utilized a really unique asset called the International Space Station for a number of years through partnerships around the world, and companies that have a presence across the country, and students or universities conducting research experiments, etc. There's conversation that either that completely get decommissioned or it is supplemented, but regardless, there might be an opportunity from the commercial side for an additional asset to be in orbit. And what does that look like? There are companies here in Texas who are participating in that conversation, both in terms of modules or satellites for communication, or suits to make sure that the people who go there are able to, sustain the environment, et cetera. What I'm most excited to see in the future is, who is that one person that really is going to be the game changer? Not about getting to space or the kind of vehicle that takes a person or things to space, but what occurs in space for the rest of us here. I think that that's the new space race, the big idea. So I'm anxious, and it might be a while before we, it's like a needle in a haystack trying to really identify what that is, first and foremost. But then secondly, I'm real interested to see how that arm linking effect can really take effect, and have a major impact. Let me describe a model that I think will help perpetuate exactly what I'm describing. It's not the one person with that one idea, needle in a haystack only, but once that's identified, then how is it leveraged with the other things? Say it's a person in private industry. Well, what then is the application in terms of a priority to the federal government, be it military or otherwise? That's the second leg to the stool. And then if we understand what the second leg of the stool is, then how can the state of Texas come in and help leverage that ecosystem as the third leg to the stool? And then wherever that person or that operation or entity or company or program is operating within Texas, hopefully, ideally, then what is that local community doing to help sustain it as the fourth leg to the stool? And that whole model, I'm real anxious to see unfold organically once that one big idea really sparks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. A colleague and I were talking about Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point recently, and that's the crux of what he's getting at. Someone's ideating Edison and whatever his invention is, but it's organizations like y'all's that are going to infuse the expertise and awareness that's crucial to making sure we get this off the ground. No pun intended. I got to ask you this question because I'm a big classic rock music fan, and one thing that I learned, I think it was in high school, I thought was the coolest thing, is we have a capsule that's presumably floating in the ether of space that has some of America's greatest hits, music floating. So if theoretically Texas were to have its own capsule of music, barbecue culture, etc., what is one thing as executive director that you would include in that capsule that really just solidifies that Texas was at the epicenter of space? It could be a song or anything.
I was going to say, if it's a song, it'd be God Bless Texas.
There we go.
Just making sure it's blasting out in every direction as loud as possible for everybody to pick up. No doubt. I had to listen to one song for eternity.
That's fair. And the aliens be like, wait a second here. We have the Star Spangled Banner, but we have this Texas song. Which one has supremacy? Well, I suppose we'll see in 10 years when Texas is really making its mark in space.
That's right.
Well, I want to, in conclusion, I want to bring it back to, for folks watching, we should have this in the show notes and we'll have this in the description down below. But I really want to encourage all of you to go to space.texas.gov. As Norman laid out, there are opportunities for each and every one of us to get involved. I have submitted comments, our organization has as well.
Thank you.
And I want you all to recognize this as an opportunity to be a part of something that will define the future of humanity. But then also, I'd be remiss not to mention there are public hearings, and I know on the website, I'm imagining a lot of this can be seen in terms of when they're going to be having those discussions. I've tuned in to almost all of them, and they are, it's the process. And if you enjoy the process, you'll love these. But it's the start of something great, and you can see that in the works. And so I want to conclude by saying, Norman, thank you to you and your leadership, and to all folks that continue to lead in this effort. Any final words for our audience you want to leave behind?
I thank you and TPPF for paying attention to this. Of course, your audience and Governor Abbott, the Lieutenant Governor, the House Speaker, Senator Huffman, and Dr. Bonin. Without their collective support, the legislature wouldn't have had the opportunity to put both the legislation and the appropriations into effect for us to do what we're trying to do right now. So thank you for helping be the platform to spread the good word.
Absolutely. Well, hope to have you back at some point when we have the strategic plan too.
I'll come back.
Great. Thank you, Norman.
Take care.